This is the Building Resilience Podcast, episode 175, Identity Diversification. Welcome to Building Resilience, a podcast where theory, practical strategies, and inspiring stories show you how to unlock your best life. I'm your host, Leah Davidson. As a certified life coach, speech-language pathologist, and nervous system resilience expert, it is my mission to teach you how to be more resilient to life's adversities. I will show you how to manage your mind, befriend your nervous system, process your emotions, and even eliminate stress. It's time to do more than just survive. It's time to thrive. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Building Resilience Podcast. Today, I'm going to start with sharing with you a couple of stories, but bear with me. I get to the point of my stories. As you know, I'm from Canada. I'm born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, and I moved to Toronto, Ontario in my late 20s. Well, as Canadians, there are a couple of different places we go to vacation that Quebecers and Ontarians like to go. The closest, most cost-effective options for escaping Canadian winters is Florida, of course, but then there's also Cancun, Mexico, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. Now, I know for years Americans weren't allowed to go to Cuba. I think you can go now, but Cuba has always been the most cost-effective option, and there's usually a ton of Canadians there. I went like 30 years ago, and while the beaches are stunning and the hotels are really beautiful, the people are also awesome. The food stinks. It kind of has a reputation for not having great food. Now, my friend went last year, and she said it still wasn't great. So when you go, you kind of have to have that expectation. And one of the reasons people complain is that there's really not a ton of options. I found that it was like the same food at every meal. The same sauce was paired with my eggs in the morning, then served with my chicken at night. And then they often ran out of different items. So you'd end up having a very limited supply of fruit or limited meats. Now, my friend said when she was there last year, they ran out of French fries. Now, my point is not to knock Cuba because, as I said, it's stunning and lovely and the people are amazing, but the food lacks the diversification. So it makes it hard to be eating the same thing every single day. Now, you contrast that to Toronto, where I live. Toronto is one of the most diverse cities in the world, which means we have some incredible food. It's kind of fun when we travel and we have great food in a certain country. We usually can come home and find something similar to what we experience because there are so many diverse options here. Within walking distance from my home, we have amazing Indian food, Thai food, Persian, Greek, a ton of Greek, because actually the area I live in the city is known as Greek Town. But there's Italian and Lebanese and Japanese and Chinese and Filipino and Jamaican. You get the point. So it keeps things interesting. We are never at a loss for food. We are sad when a restaurant close by closes down, but we also usually know that there are others very close that we can go to. There's a ton of variety. So I'm sharing these stories with you for a reason, not just to make you hungry, but I hope it does. And I hope you put Toronto on your list of cities to visit because it is an amazing city, and then let me know. My next little story is about financial investments. Now, recently, I had a conversation with a friend about an investment that she hadn't done really well in. And we got to talking about how hard the economy has been in the past couple of years. We talked about how some people were really struggling with some real estate investments, land development, private lending, real estate investment trusts. The market has really taken a bit of a hit because of interest rates and so forth. And we talked about how it's really not fun when you have some investments that aren't doing well. Nobody wants that at all. But it also feels less stressful if you're diversified in other areas, if you have a mix of things in your portfolio. Now, back in my banking days, I'm not sure if I've shared that I started my working career outside of university in banking. I actually worked in a branch as an assistant manager, and then I also worked as an investment consultant. I even had like my securities license, my mutual funds license. I worked in banking for several years. But at any rate, we were always encouraging people to diversify their portfolio. So that has stuck with me to this day. Now, my third story is one that comes from some research that came from a longitudinal study that was done back in 1986, and it was done with nuns to study aging and Alzheimer's disease. The study focused on a group of 678 American Roman Catholic sisters who are members of the School Sisters of Notre Dame, and they were all over the age of 75. The purpose of the study was to try to see if activities and academics and past experiences and people's dispositions were correlated to continued cognitive, neurological, and physical ability as these nuns got older. Well, Lisa Genova, who is the author of Still Alice, she talked about this particular study in her TED Talk about Alzheimer's. And she talked about how the nuns were followed for 2 decades. They got regular physical checkups and cognitive tests. And when they died, they had actually agreed to donate their brains for autopsy. Now, what was surprising when they did the autopsies is they actually showed signs of Alzheimer's. There was this presence of plaques and tangles and brain shrinkage, which are considered signs of Alzheimer's. But what was interesting is that the nuns who possessed these brains had no signs of the disease while they were alive. So their brain on autopsy showed they had Alzheimer's, but they didn't have any signs while they were alive. And of course, the question is, how is that possible? Well, scientists think that it is due to something called a high level of cognitive reserve. Now, cognitive reserve is something that I've talked about many times. I even did an episode on it like several years ago. You'll have to go back. But these nuns had more functional synapses. What they found is that people who have more cognitive reserve, which includes things like more formal education, who have a high degree of literacy, who regularly engage in mentally stimulating activities, all have greater cognitive reserve. They end up creating multiple pathways. There is an abundance and a redundancy in connections and pathways, so that even when they have a disease like Alzheimer's, which will compromise many of these paths, there are enough other paths. There's many extra backup connections. And because of these backup connections, people didn't have the signs of Alzheimer's when they were alive. Now, in her TED Talk, Lisa gives a great example, and I want to offer you a similar one. If you only know one thing about me, that I have a podcast called Building Resilience, you have that one pathway about me. And if anything impacts that pathway and interrupts it, then you may lose that connection. But if you know more about me, that I'm Canadian, I was raised in Montreal, I live in Toronto, I'm an SLP, a coach, I run a membership called Connections, I have an advanced training in nervous system resilience, I have 5 kids, I'm married to a husband called Rob. See, you do know a lot about me. All these things I just shared, I've talked about in the podcast. But if one of those pathways is interrupted or damaged, it's not such a big deal because you have other pathways to access the subject of me. So how is this relevant to what I have been talking about with diversification? Well, ideally, if we want to be resilient to things like Alzheimer's and maximize our brain health, we need to introduce a lot of different ways to take care of our brains. And we need them to be diversified. Sleep, aerobic exercise, nutrition, new learning, all sorts of new learning, language, dance, taking courses, games, reading. The more diversified, the better. So this idea of diversification really brings me to my topic of today. That was a long introduction, but I told you I would get somewhere. I'm talking about something called identity diversification. And I want to share with you why it is important for us to be diversifying ourselves, diversifying our roles, our identity, our thoughts. And I'm going to share with you an analogy that I teach in my advanced training and I've used for many years with my clients. I want you to think of yourself like you have a shopping cart. So there is you, and then there is you pushing a shopping cart. And now I want you to think, what is in your cart? What do you put in your cart? Now, we often load things up in our cart, like our roles, or maybe some of our material possessions, or our talents, our perspectives, our accolades, our accomplishments. And we may also put in our habits, some of our characteristics or skills. But here's the question. Are you in your cart? Or are you pushing your cart? Where we often get tripped up is we also get in the cart. The cart then becomes what defines us. We are one and the same of what is in the cart. We become one with what is in the cart. And here's a problem with that. If something comes along and tips the cart over and everything falls out, we lose everything. We lose our sense of who we are. We feel lost. We scramble to try to pick up pieces, but we may feel really hopeless. But I want to offer to you, we are not in the cart. You are not in your cart. You are just pushing the cart. You can add things to the cart. You can remove things from the cart. You can peek into other people's carts and judge what other people have or wish you had what is in their cart. You can decide if that's helpful for you to do or not, but you are not in the cart. You are separate. If the cart tips over, you still exist. You are still you. You are still worthy. And we actually want to get to know who we are just pushing the cart. Since we're not in our cart, who are we? That is our true identity. Now, your identity is really just a collection of thoughts about who you are, your values, your beliefs. It's your self-view. It is the core of who you are. It defines your self-concept, what you think of you. It is who is pushing that cart. And even without any thoughts, values, or beliefs, you are you. You are a divine soul. Your worth is in being, as I often say, not in doing, not in what is in your cart or how you are pushing your cart. You alone with no cart still have that worth. Now, we often mix up identity and roles, and we've talked about this before. I think when we talked about being victim versus agent, our identity is internal. Our roles are external. Our roles are what you do, how you behave. It's the outward, who others people see you as. It defines your relationships and positions in relationships. And you can step into a role and step out of a role. You can play many roles. A role is external. It is what you do, and it can change, and it can also be taken away. But your identity is your core. It is linked to your nervous system. Now, we do build parts of our identity based on the imprints of our nervous system. Every experience we have leaves an imprint on us. And I'm not going to go too deep into that here today because it's a separate journey than where I want to go. But obviously, much of who we are can also be considered an adaptation or an over-adaptation, who we are when we are in a survival pattern. And of course, much of the work that we do to befriend our nervous system is to learn who are we when we are safe in our home state. Let's get back to diversification, because here is where I see things happening with many of my clients. Someone or something comes along and pushes your cart over. Everything is everywhere. And you stand there feeling completely lost and out of sorts. No roles. You may feel like you have no identity, often because, as I mentioned, we mix up our roles being our identity. But remember, you're not in your cart. You're just pushing it. But when things get pushed over and everything falls apart, it can be very traumatic. It can be hard. And you may start to go around and try to pick stuff up and repack your cart. Here's where it gets tricky. Some of us had very limited diversification in our cart. We may have been so focused on one particular role or thing, and when the cart gets tipped, that particular thing is not available anymore, or it's very damaged. But what if we had a lot of different things in our cart? Then as we start picking things up, some things will be lost, but other things are easy to put back in. The more diversified your cart was to start with, sometimes the easier it is. And for many of us, we haven't had our carts tipped yet. Maybe they have been bumped, but maybe not a full-on tip. And cart tips and bumps, they can come in many, many forms. The impact of the bump is going to be different for everybody. So there are illness or injury bumps or change of relationship status bumps, empty nest bumps, change of job bumps, moving to a new place, transitions. It can even be somebody doing something personal development and wanting to make some shifts. I'm going to offer to you that now is the time to preventatively start asking yourself, what is in your cart? Because inevitably, your cart is going to be tipped or bumped. How diversified is your cart? That if something or somebody comes along and bumps you and your cart is lost or impacted, you want to have a diversified cart like those nuns, where pathways can get cut off, but you still have other ways to travel. This will make your journey much easier. You have more access and things to turn to. I like to do this exercise with my clients, and I did it recently with one client, which is what triggered this whole episode. I called it Identity Diversification, but it's really a mix of identity and role diversification that we want. I suggest that you can try this. Make a list of all the different areas of your life, including things like your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health. Then you can include things like your various relationships, your romantic relationship, if you have kids, your role as a parent, even your role as a sibling, a friend, a child. And then you can look at meaningful activities. Do you work, volunteer, go to school? You can even take a peek at your financial life. What does that look like? Your physical environment. And then leisure activities, hobbies, recreation. I also like to look at your personal development and your cognitive development. What are you doing to build up your cognitive reserve? So take each area, list out each area, and then explore these areas and kind of evaluate how you are in each area and why you are that way in each area. Then what I encourage you to do is take a look at your overall satisfaction with where you fall in each area. How does your overall picture look? Are you satisfied with it? Are you diversified? Are there areas that you want to change? Maybe you want to improve. Maybe you want to switch. Maybe you want to diversify a bit more. And how would you do that? What would a shift look like? What could you do in these areas to make a shift? So I really do guide them through a much more structured exercise, obviously, but you get the gist. It's to get a feel of how diversified you are in your life right now, in your identity and your roles. And I usually encourage them to do an identity inventory, some type of evaluation of skills and values and character traits, because it's really your values that will help you decide what to put an emphasis on. Where do you want to prioritize? It's important to also take an inventory of your thoughts about yourself, your thoughts about your roles and your identity. How much emphasis do you put on one thing? For example, a common one is for a parent. If you think of yourself as your only role of being a parent, then when your kids grow up and don't need you as much, it can be a devastating blow if you've hooked everything onto it and don't have enough diversification. Or this can happen if you hook a lot on your work, a profession. If that is where you gain all your worth, you lose that job and you sustain a really big blow. Or if you believe that you have to live in a certain town or drive a certain car or have accumulated a certain amount of wealth, or maybe have certain trainings or certifications or degrees. We want to take an inventory of where you find your worth, who you think you are and why. Do you believe that you have to act or think a certain way or achieve or acquire or perform a certain way to be somebody, to be valued, to be accepted, either by others, by society, or yourself? And while it may seem like I'm just telling you to do more, maybe when you diversify, you will want to do more. Maybe you'll want to diversify in that way. But what I'm also offering is an invitation to evaluate and explore your mindset about your existing diversification. Chances are you are already more than one role, more than one hobby. You already know that you're more than your profession or more than your relationship status. So it's a matter of just embracing it, reminding yourself of all the things that you care about, all the contributions that make you you in so many different areas and ways, reminding yourself of everything you already do, ways you are already living your best life, so to speak, living your values, showing up how you want to show up. You are more than what you think you are. So we want to acknowledge the diversification of us as humans. the diversification of our roles, our identities. Maybe we do want to shift or change things up, but maybe we just need to think more diversely and lovingly and kindly and acknowledge all the many different versions of us, the past, the present, and the future, the many sides of us, the many parts of us, all together creating who we actually are. Remember, you are your own little shopper, simply pushing your cart. You have your worth without the cart. You are still worthy and amazing, even if your cart spills and everything falls out. You get to decide what to put in the cart and what to take out of the cart. Go through your cart and see what is already there. Add to it. Take things away. Make sure it is diversified and that you acknowledge it all. And most of all, happy shopping. I'll see you in the aisles. Have a great week. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Building Resilience podcast. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about managing stress, building resilience, and leading a more purposeful life, then make sure we're connected on Instagram and Facebook at Leah Davidson Life Coaching. You can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter at www.leahdavidsonlifecoaching.com/newsletter. Looking forward to connecting.